This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
I found it. Look, I love ice cream, but I'm not 18 years old anymore, so I can't eat a lot of it. But I found it. I found a healthy ice cream alternative that actually tastes great. Sweet pea non-dairy ice cream. Get this. It's made with chickpeas. I know it tastes great. Tastes and feels like real ice cream. Look, I screwed around with soy-based and oat-based products. They all tasted like shit. Sweet pea made from chickpeas is the first healthy alternative I found that I absolutely love. I'm in DC. I get sweet pea at Giant Foods. If you're in DC, Philly, Pennsylvania, go to Giant Food stores. If you're in New York City, go to Balducci or Key Foods. In San Francisco, go to Nugget. You will absolutely love this. It tastes great. Made with chickpeas. That's so cool. It tastes great.
Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh here, White Flag with Joe Walsh. This is the podcast. Thank you for listening. Hey, quick intro to today's conversation. This is a conversation with Charlotte Clymer that I recorded a year or so ago. One of the most fascinating, interesting, helpful conversations I've had on this podcast. Charlotte Clymer, who is a transgender American. We talked about LGBTQ issues. We talked about transgender issues. And I learned a lot. And I found it fascinating and helpful. It's an important, timely issue that the American people, I think, need to continually be educated on and be open on and tolerant on. So I thought it would be really helpful to replay this conversation I had a year ago with Charlotte Clymer. Just a wonderful, wonderful person. She's taught me so much about this issue of transgender men and women and opened my eyes to a lot. We didn't agree on everything, but I learned a lot and I thought it was extremely helpful. So have a listen. I have been dying to talk to this person because I find her to be fascinating. And I'm going to do something with Charlotte Clymer that I don't think I've done in the almost year I've been doing this White Flag podcast. And Charlotte, if this feels like it's coming out of left field, I apologize, but it may be coming out of left field. I've never done this before, but I'm going to start our conversation like this. I want to apologize to you. And I mean this, and let me apologize. I've never done this before. We live in a scary, dangerous time right now. The world I come from, the right, has just declared war with violence on so many aspects of our life. I want to get into some LGBTQ issues with my guest, Charlotte Clymer. And there is, as Charlotte knows well, just a real hatred coming from my world of the right when it comes to transgender Americans. And Charlotte, I'm apologizing because you and I have never met. This is the first time we've spoken, but I helped to create this atmosphere. You know that, I know that. I'm trying to make up for it, but look, I'm not as bad as these crazy ass Republicans and idiots now, but where we are right now, with how radicalized the hate is on the right. Charlotte, I helped create that, especially with some of the issues you care deepest about. And I just wanted to start our conversation by apologizing for that. And hi, I'm glad to be with you.
Well, hey, first of all, it's really great to be here, Joe. I know we've been looking forward to this for a while, literally weeks, folks, that we've been trying to get this chat together. Finally it worked out. Joe, I really appreciate you opening up with an apology. But to be clear, I didn't come here to expect an apology or to, run through the past in a excruciating, painful way for us both and all your listeners. I do think what's good is when we can all admit when there are areas of improvement to be made,
Yeah.
and then kind of work on illustrating a future together.
Charlotte, with where we are right now, and we're 5-6 days away from the midterms. When it comes to LGBTQ issues, when it comes to transgender Americans, your general feeling about the vibe right now in America, are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling like some progress is being made? Are you still fearful? Where's your head and heart at right now?
I have always believed in America. And I know that that's that kind of phrase that you hear and it sounds canned, but I don't know. I've just always been this earnest kid who believed in America's promise. And I think that, even when our country struggles as it does with certain issues, that we have a tendency to overcome that and slowly and all too painfully build that incremental progress. Look, Tuesday is going to be tough on some levels. I do believe that. But I'm also optimistic. I really am. I think that there are enough reasonable people in this country that a lot of us, regardless of where we are in the political spectrum, we really can come together and kind of build the future that we all want here.
You came out as a transgender woman in 2017, November 2017.
That's right.
Have things gotten better in the past 4 years? Or is that kind of a tough question?
Oh, gosh. So that's complicated. I think in some ways it has improved. In most ways it has not.
In most ways it has not.
In most ways it has
Okay.
not. And most of that bad stuff has happened in the past year or so. The Republican Party at the state level has introduced hundreds of pieces of legislation that target trans people, on everything from healthcare access to gender marker IDs. Everything that has to do with trans people has become a political flashpoint, especially over the past year. Now, that's how it's been, by the way, for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But it's really been in the last 12 months that Republicans have really leaned in on this issue.
Clearly, and we're seeing that in Florida and Texas and a number of states. And again, Charlotte, that's, as well as I do. I came from that world. But right-wing media, I think, drives a lot of this. And I think right-wing media, which used to be my home, there's a real payoff to scare people. And I think they use this issue, transgenderism, to critical race theory, you name the issue, to scare their listeners.
Yeah, and I also think that it's also a convenient excuse for some folks to leverage whatever kind of nonsense is going on with their stuff. I mean, I think you are right. I think most of it is about scaring folks who don't know any better. Let's be real here. A lot of folks who may kind of be suspicious that they should know better, but they would rather not know better. I firmly believe that adults should be adults, and part of being adult means being responsible for what we say and what we believe, and having that responsibility for growth. So I say all that to point out that yes, there are some people who, in good faith, don't know any better. But that doesn't describe everyone, under the sun. And by the way, it's not just conservatives.
Yeah.
There are some folks in the middle, and there is a tiny fraction of folks on the left who also have some less than great views on trans people. So this is not just a problem that's limited to the right.
Charlotte, that's interesting. So tell me, based on what you just said, tell me if you kind of agree with what I say. I think that the older white population on the right, generally, when it comes to transgender issues, many of those folks are probably unreachable. I'm curious about what you said about the left, but I guess I've always thought that most people in the middle are generally tolerant and understanding. They just don't know, and it feels to them like a lot of shit's happening real fast.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that part of it is just the saturation of issues right now. It used to be that, I mean, gosh, even maybe 10, 15 years ago, you'd have like two or three things you really cared about, tops, and probably one or two if you were the kind of person who had like a full time job or two full time job and kids and shuttle backwards and forwards from school to work. All these things going on that most Americans are so saturated with stuff they don't have time to focus on
Yeah.
issues that don't directly relate to them. But at the same time, there are folks on the far right who I'm not going to say they're unreachable. I will say that they are temporarily untrackable. And by the way, that is how it is on every issue, regardless of what it is. There's a very, very small percentage of folks who are still against interracial marriage.
Yeah.
There are some folks in this country on the right who believe that women should be permitted to vote. These views are out there, but what I tell people is, don't let that characterize an entire group or characterize where we can go as a country. We need two strong political parties. We need multiple strong political parties, but for now, I'll settle for two strong political parties. We need people pushing back against each other. That is how we progress as a country in terms of our policy, our culture, our social state, our social makeup. It comes from challenging each other. I really do believe in that biblical verse that iron sharpens iron.
It's so interesting, Charlotte, because I'm actually more bearish than you on the right. I mean, obviously, I come from there, and I still talk to or hear from hundreds of these folks every day. I think on issues like this, on like issues like critical race theory or transgender issues, I don't think most of those hearts and minds can be changed. I think it's people. I think you're right in that when it comes to opposition to interracial marriage and probably opposition to contraception, that's probably a much smaller cohort. But like when you look at what you brought this up, Florida isn't alone. Moving to ban gender surgery and puberty blockers for minors. Charlotte, I guarantee you that most everybody on the right generally doesn't understand that issue, but they agree with it. Like there's no way that minors in this country should be messing around with this stuff. That's the kind of crap I hear all the time.
Yeah, it's funny though. And we'll get back to that issue. But I do want to point out that 20 years ago, I think we would have been having this conversation about same-sex marriage.
Yes.
I think that,
yes.
I would have been here saying, I think it will get better. And you would have understandably said, I don't know. Those folks I talked to on the right are firmly opposed to same-sex marriage. Even now with Obergefell potentially in trouble at the Supreme Court. Obergefell, by the way, folks, is the same-sex marriage case. Even with that potentially in trouble, you now have almost half of Republicans who support same-sex marriage.
Oh,
which is amazing. I mean,
that ship has sailed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, going back to the gender affirming surgery and puberty blockers.
Yes.
Every major medical organization has made it clear that gender affirming care, and that is basically health care for trans non-binary people and trans non-binary youth, is not only medically necessary, but it's scientifically valid. I'm talking about the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Gynecological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Every single major medical organization has studied this issue and said that gender affirming care is necessary and valid. And moreover, the puberty blockers issue has become just so remarkably weaponized, devoid of any contextualization. So a couple things about puberty blockers. First of all, there are more cis children. Cis children, by the way, folks, means people, kids who are not transgender. So when I say cis, that just basically means not transgender. if I could say non-transgender kids, but that's a mouthful. So when you hear cis, don't take that as an insult. That's just a way of differentiating people who are not transgender from
Yeah.
people who are transgender.
But you know what's
So-
funny? You know what's funny, Charlotte? And I'm so glad you said that. Even when I've said what you just said to so many of my folks on the right, they get pissed off about that. That we have to, that you got to use the expression cisgender. Like that pisses them off. But continue.
I am curious though. Have you asked them what they would prefer?
Straight. Why do we even need to be labeled, Joe? What do you mean? What do you mean? Why does there need to be something in front of gender? You got transgender and you just got normal, straight, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I get a mouthful of crap like that.
Yeah. Well,
but by the way, Charlotte, you're the first one who's told me, and it makes so much fucking sense. It's just, it is a mouthful to say all the other stuff.
It is.
It is.
I mean, and by the way, I don't think that someone should be characterized by what they're not. I think non-transgender, if I were to say non-transgender people, I think that's, incredibly insulting. That's basically saying that someone is defined because of a quality that they lack.
Yeah.
And I respect and love cisgender people way too much to say something like that. So
continue.
That's just me.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So puberty blockers. So, but first of all, let's make this clear. No child under 16 gets gender affirming surgery. That doesn't happen. That is not a thing in anywhere, not only in our country, but around the world. It's just not a thing. And that is by common sense. Medical practitioners over decades have come up with what's called WPATH. And this is a medical protocol that takes children and the parents of trans children or potentially trans children through a process of logically and empathetically determining whether or not they're going to need gender affirming care. Now, puberty blockers are great for this because they delay the decisions that have to be made long enough for a child and the parents of that child, in consultation with medical providers, to figure out whether they need that care. Puberty blockers are reversible. As soon as you stop taking them, the puberty just goes on as forward as it was planned. And here's the funny thing: more children who are I'm going to say it this time, more children who are not transgender take puberty blockers annually than children who are transgender.
Why?
And this has been the way for a long time now. And the reason being is that there are many, I don't know if there are many, but there are at least several medical conditions that require puberty blockers. One of these is called advanced onset adolescent growth. It's basically the child's body growing way too quickly. And the puberty blocker will slow down that growth in a way that is healthy and allows them to develop normally, or develop typically, I should say. Mm-hmm. Now, there are a lot of these conditions that require that. So it's funny, though, as long as cisgender children were taking puberty blockers, no one cared. No one cared. It was only until they were prescribed for trans children, which, by the way, this is what anti-trans people should want, is for these decisions to be delayed. So puberty blockers are actually a great thing, or they should be a great thing in the eyes of an anti-trans person. But it allows people to make these decisions in good time.
Do you think
that wasn't too much of a rambling
answer? No, Charlotte, I wanted that from you. That's helpful.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Do you think most Americans are open and tolerant when it comes to transgender issues, even if they don't quite understand in detail? Do you think most of us are open and tolerant?
Yes, I do. I firmly believe that.
Like if we, figuratively speaking, we went to war with the right, who plays these culture war issues, on this particular culture war issue that the right's been very successful with. If we went to war on this issue, there are more people on the open and understanding and tolerant and accepting side than that side.
I do believe that. Of course, you have to.
I do too.
If you break that down into different issues, it becomes a lot murkier. But overall, if everyone could press a button right now and vote, and they could say, I am open to trans equality or I am not open to trans equality, most people in this country would say they're open. Yes.
See, and Charlotte, I so agree with that. And in many ways, I can, even though I'm not typical, I consider myself kind of a typical American on this, in that I'm open and tolerant, live and let live, blah 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 blah, all that good important stuff. And I think when you take the trans agenda and as you said, you break it down into some specific, more pushback on certain issues. And some of that, again, may have to do with understanding. Like you just said something fascinating, the whole notion of gender affirming care for children who identify or think they're transgender. When it comes to surgery and puberty blockers and all of that, that's not done for children under 16. Generally.
Puberty blockers are done to delay puberty,
Got
but
it.
not surgery.
Surgery.
Not like cutting into a body. That is not done for kids under 16. No.
And I know for a fact that because again, this is the world I'm in. So many people on the right don't know or believe that. They think, because I hear this all the time, this is being done to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids are having surgery. Charlotte, I think America wrestles with this. Like, when, at what age do we accept that a child should be trusted to believe and know that they are the sex they identify as? And I'm sorry if I phrased that wrong, but when do we as a family or as a society give that decision to a child? Like, you were born male, you are female, you identify as female. I think Americans wrestle with, at what age should we let children decide that? Does that make sense?
Well, it's so funny too. Oh, it does make sense. It does make sense. What's interesting is that while people who are, and how do I put this in an accurate framing? Well, when people,
and by the way, Charlotte, to interrupt you, and I apologize, it's a horrible habit of mine. These specific questions I'm going to ask, to me, reflect the specific, just kind of like concerns that I think the majority of folks in the middle who are embracing have and don't understand. Continue.
Sure. No, I'm glad you pointed that out. For folks outside of the trans community, with no context, without knowing any of the science, without knowing any trans people, I can understand how, if they knew nothing else and they were operating in good faith, they would be deeply, deeply concerned at the idea that a child wakes up, says, I want to be a different gender, and then, their parents just go along with it and say, okay, great, let's throw you out into the deep end and see what happens.
Yeah,
and that's not the way it works. In fact, for the vast majority of trans children in this country, getting any sort of gender affirming care is a pain in the ass. I mean, it really is. You have to go through psychologists, medical professionals. You have to go through a very, I would say, strict process of getting access to even just basic medical care.
Counseling,
That's right. Because healthcare is expensive in this country.
Yeah.
Even when it's life-saving, and gender affirming care, by the way, is life-saving. Numerous studies have shown this. But what all of us should want, regardless of our political party, is emphasis on a system that requires folks to go through a rigorous process determining if a child fits the characteristics of someone who has gender dysphoria, which is the medical terminology for someone who is trans or non-binary.
Yeah.
And then, they should have access to mental health professionals who are able to ascertain whether this is maybe this is just something that a kid is into right now, a characteristic. Not to say that they're saying trans because they think it's cool, but they might identify with different gendered behaviors in a way that makes their parents concerned, but it's just them, being kids, exploring other things.
Yeah.
But let's also flip this around. If, let's say, a young male child were only into characteristically boy things, didn't want to do anything having to do with girl stuff, anything traditionally associated with girls. I'm talking about babysitting, talking about cleaning, anything that is historically tied to what it means to be a woman in this country in our social life, like the 1950s America, right? If a young male child were to say that, I don't think it would get the kind of pushback that we're seeing right now. Even though a young child should learn how to clean, they should learn how to take care of their sibling. They should learn how to do these basic tasks that every human adult has to learn, right? If that were to happen, you wouldn't see parents, not parents, you wouldn't see, I would say, social conservatives freaking out about that.
Yeah.
Because that is seen as normal, right?
So Charlotte, then, based on a lot of what you just said, and I would concur, then it's really harmful that we've got states moving to ban any and all gender affirming care for minors.
Yeah. It's putting these young lives at risk.
Why are these, in your mind? Because I think I got my answer, but what's going on? Why are these states, Texas and Florida and the rest, doing this?
Well, first of all, I don't think that any lawmaker at the gubernatorial or federal level believes in any of this nonsense. I really don't.
Fuck no.
I don't think that Ted Cruz believes that gender affirming care is abusive. I don't think that at all. I think that they see it as a politically expedient way for advancing their other goals. Trans issues are being used as an electoral vehicle to push other heinous policies. That's what we're seeing right now. Now, I'm not saying that at the state level there aren't many Republicans who really do believe that gender affirming care is abusive. But for the most part, I think that most lawmakers who are educated adults and otherwise reasonable understand the massive logical gaps in their reasoning, but they would rather ignore that because it is convenient to treat trans issues as an electoral wedge.
Oh, completely. And Charlotte, they're hearing from the same fucking base that I hear from every day that's telling them 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids in this country are choosing their sex and then having surgery to affirm that choice. They're hearing that shit from their voters, from their base, because I hear that all the time. So on this issue of gender affirming care, gender dysphoria, the notion of a really rigorous process to make sure this is a proper decision, a proper road, that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. But I want to put a caveat in there.
Yeah.
Every trans person, and especially every trans child, should have access to that process because again, healthcare is cost prohibitive in this country so often, and certainly for trans healthcare. Insurance companies don't cover a lot of this stuff. And not because it's not necessary or life-saving, as again, I point out that every medical organization has pointed out, but because we are not culturally where we need to be for insurance companies to be forced to recognize some of these treatments as life-saving, even though they are literally life-saving. They really are. So, we are far away from having, yes, a rigorous system that's endorsed by everybody.
Yeah.
But we're also far away from having the kind of health care that everyone can get in this country based not on, the size of their wallet, but based on their need.
And that is a great issue that Charlotte and I could debate and talk about until the cows come home.
Yes.
That's a huge issue and probably one of the biggest issues. But Charlotte, that process of I'm 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old or whatever. And I identify as this, and I think this is what I am. That can start at any age, correct?
It can, but there are kids who, express the desire to be a different gender at some point in their lives, and sometimes it just doesn't, go that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's like a little girl who is a tomboy. Sometimes it's a young boy who's, into some traditionally female things. And, maybe it turns out that he's, not trans. Maybe he just likes those, maybe he likes playing with dolls. Maybe he likes, designing clothes, it doesn't always have to be this either or, and that's what drives me absolutely fucking nuts.
Bonkers. Yeah.
It's so frustrating because we take all nuance out of the equation. If we actually recognize the nuances here, we could all get along on this issue so well. Because you're right. Not every kid who says they're trans is trans. That's not how it works.
God, Charlotte, if we could engage in nuance with every fucking issue, we'd be better off as a country. So swat some of these objections and complaints down that I get from the right all the time. Hey, Charlotte, it's no coincidence that this gender dysphoria has been skyrocketing in the last 6 or 7 years. This is a socialization thing and kids are jumping on the bandwagon. Hey, Charlotte, why is it skyrocketing? I hear that all the time.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I understand you're playing a character there. No worries.
Yes. Thank you. Bingo. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. There is an acceleration of acceptance that we have seen over the past 2 decades. Now, those of us who are 35 and older, that's you and me, we are generations where we saw homophobia, and I'm saying homophobia for the context of what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
We saw homophobia really out in the open in the 90s. Yes, we saw some pro-gay stuff too, but we also saw a lot of anti-gay stuff that was kind of accepted in broader society.
Yeah.
So for us, this is a lot more complicated. For kids, for like Gen Z, for folks in their early 20s, this isn't complicated. Even Republicans who are Gen Zers or in their early 20s, they look at issues of sexual orientation, which is gay, lesbian, bisexual. They look at that as just, of course. Yeah. The person says they're gay, they're gay. Interestingly, most also look at trans issues as, this very common sense thing. Like, oh, if this, peer of mine says that they're, if their authenticity is in a different gender, then that must be true. So because there's that level of acceptance, which by the way has not risen up through our cultural hubs. You know what I mean by that? So our media, our government.
Yeah.
Every sphere of power right now is controlled by folks like us. It's not controlled by folks of these younger generations. So the reason I'm saying this is because just because you don't see that acceptance in wider media, go to a high school and talk to, I don't know, even any given 10 students about trans issues, regardless of their political beliefs. The vast majority of them will readily say that they support trans rights. Now, because of that acceptance for these generations, these younger folks, we're seeing more trans non-binary kids in the closet who feel comfortable coming out, which is a good thing. That's a really good thing. But because that is not as widely reported in media, you get these polls that come out and it says, 10% more, and I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but 5% more or so kids now identify as trans non-binary. That's not because it's a trend. That's because these kids who would have been scared to death to come out 10, 15 years ago now have peers who affirm them and make it comfortable to come out to their peers. That's what's happening.
And that's again, you're right. That's all positive. And maybe, Charlotte, transgenders are like, when it comes to
transgender people, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And by the way, Charlotte, again, and see, this is what's so fucking cool about this. I am, even though I'm not an average typical guy, I step in it and I'm trying, and most Americans are and do, and it's always so helpful when you help me with the proper language, transgender people. Charlotte, I saw this, what you just said, I saw 3 years ago when I was still on the radio, before I lost my radio show because I opposed Trump. And I went and spoke at a high school in the Chicago suburbs, and a transgender young woman in class stood up and said, I love to listen to you on the radio, but you were making fun of like 64 different genders on your show the other night, and that really hurt my feelings. And by the way, that really helped fucking wake me up to not engage in stupid humor anymore. But Charlotte, the other interesting point was, and there were a bunch of young Republicans in this class, high school class. Everybody in class chimed in and agreed and understood. I feel like a fucking old dinosaur.
Isn't that
But
wild?
but that was
Can
your
I tell you
point.
something real quick to make you feel better about this?
What? Help.
When I meet a Gen Z kid who doesn't like me, I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that has nothing to do with me being transgender. Like usually, if I meet someone on Capitol Hill at one of these embassy events,
Yeah.
or something at the Heritage Foundation, whatever the hell, and I meet someone my age or your age or someone who's 35 or older, and they don't like me, there's a damn good chance it's because they've never met a trans person, and
Yes.
I make them uncomfortable just by my mere presence.
Completely.
With Gen Z kids, you know exactly where you stand.
Wow.
And it's not because I'm trans; it's because they don't like that I supported, I don't know, a mainstream Democrat, or they don't like that I don't like their music. And it's so refreshing to be hated for things that I can choose, and things I can't choose.
That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
We're in the same boat in that regard.
Yeah, well, I'm a freaking hell of a lot older than you are. Okay, Charlotte, my character then would take what you just said, and my character would throw it right back at you, because this is what I hear. Hey, Joe, it's because the medical community and all these gender clinics, the people that work there, they're the ones, they like have pressure to push kids into this. Like I hear that all the time from people on the right.
Oh God, I don't even know what to do with that.
Just fucking push it away.
I have heard that said, by the way. And, this is what the problem with this is, that when you construct a motivation that, by the way, has no proof, you can't disprove things.
Yeah.
You can't prove the non-existence of something because it's non-existent. You can't tangibly point out that something doesn't exist in our world. Now you can look at a box, like a discrete area, and you can say, see, there's nothing here. And we can both agree that there's nothing here. But if I were to say, this doesn't exist in the world, we can't look at the entire world and know that this doesn't exist somewhere. Right? Now, I'm not trying to complicate this. Oh, go ahead.
No. You just answered that. You sufficiently answered that objection. The final objection that I hear that I'm going to throw your way all the time is, this won't surprise you, Charlotte. From my Fox News watching former friends and supporters, Joe, there's an epidemic of young people out there in their early 20s and mid 20s who are running around, who had surgery done, and it's messed them up, and they want to reverse it, and they can't. And there's an epidemic of people out there, Joe. Because Hannah or Tucker or somebody said something, Joe. I hear that all the time.
Yeah, no, that is one of those claims that's bandied about a lot. So to be clear, there are some people who decide to transition, and then they do what's called detransitioning. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. There is a very, very small fraction of a percentage of the trans community that does decide to detransition. This is very small, and I don't know the exact number, but it's in the single low digits. It is a very, very tiny fraction. But what gets left of this conversation is that a lot of these folks aren't detransitioning because they're not transgender. They're detransitioning because they've decided that living in their authenticity is just too fucking hard.
Ah, interesting.
Because they don't get hired by certain employers. They get denied housing. In most of the United States right now, literally most of the United States, it is legally permissible or allowed to deny trans people housing, to deny us credit, to deny us equitable jury service, to deny us public accommodations. When I travel, let's say I go to my home state of Texas, I have to make sure that on a connector flight, wherever that state happens to be, that I look up the local laws to see what rights I'm entitled to if I have to use the restroom. I don't, but by the way, and this is something that, trans folks don't talk about a lot openly. I watch what I eat and drink while I'm traveling, because I know that if I have to use a restroom in a place that's hostile, so let's say I connect in O'Hare, and In Illinois, they have very strong pro-LGBTQ
Yeah.
laws and pro-trans laws. But let's say there's a line going into the women's restroom at O'Hare,
Yeah.
and I have to make a decision. I decide, okay, well, I can either get in line and, just hope nothing goes wrong, or I get in line to use the restroom and some, batshit ridiculous transphobe sees me, and which more often than not is a man, by the way.
Yeah.
Sees me and then makes a big fuss about it. And then suddenly I become the center of attention. I may be physically assaulted, right? So there's all these things that trans folks have to worry about. And so you see some trans people who start to live authentically because they feel finally that they have the pieces in place to live safely and with dignity and respect. And then they find that they don't. And they decide, you know what, I would rather take my chances living in the closet, risking suicide, risking depression, all these things that come with an untreated medical diagnosis, than I would risking my safety living out in the open. That's why.
It's Charlotte, you alluded to this. It's fascinating. Homosexuality was decriminalized in the entire country only 2 decades ago. Same-sex marriage, law of the land, 6-7 years ago. It's like, and I think you said this, discrimination against transgender people is almost like the last bastion of, at least based on sexual identity, the last bastion of discrimination. And I was blown away by I've read a bunch of stuff you wrote, and I wasn't aware of how difficult it is and the discrimination that transgender people still face. I had no idea. And as you just said, Charlotte, I mean, listing the things, and I read that piece, June 2020, it's a great piece. Everything you do and think about and go through when you simply fucking travel in this country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's funny too. I can't travel to a lot of countries. That is one thing I did not anticipate when I came out of the closet. I knew that there would be things I'd have to deal with,
Right.
But I didn't anticipate. Well, so let's say, let's say Saudi Arabia. If I wanted to travel to Saudi Arabia, let's say I wanted to travel to the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, this is not all Muslim majority countries who are like this, but it tends to be in religious fanatical countries that have a Muslim population where that tends to be a problem. If I were to travel to Abu Dhabi, I am really putting myself at risk doing that. Now, will I be safe if I follow the rules, go straight to my hotel room, don't bother anybody? I'll probably be okay. But I don't want to take that chance. There are some trans people who do take that chance, and I commend them. I support their decisions. I would rather not go to a country where I know I have no civil rights whatsoever and risk the possibility of being imprisoned. Brittany Griner. Does anyone really think that Brittany Griner was arrested for having one vape pen on her? No, she was arrested because she was a Black gay woman traveling in a country that does not like Black gay women. That's why Brittany Griner was arrested.
Completely. All right, I'm going to throw my pet peeve at you.
Yeah.
This isn't my character. This is my own pet peeve. And I know you're a huge fucking sports fan because I follow you religiously. Transgender people in sports. Mm-hmm. This, I think, is one of those issues where for most Americans who broadly embrace the agenda, this this issue here, they have trouble with. And
that's right.
like I do, and maybe I don't sufficiently understand it. To me, it's unfair to have a transgender woman compete in high school or college sports with cisgender women. It just seems sports-wise to be an unfair advantage. Speak to that, Charlotte.
Yeah, sure. So, but by the way, we can have an entire episode just on this.
I love this one, Charlotte. I love this one. And I know you do too.
I do. And because it is so easy to blow people's minds with just basic facts. So let's set the scene because I want to make sure that we really sink our teeth into this one because this is the one issue
Thank
that
you.
really, really gets people spun up.
Thank you.
If you ask if you poll Americans, about 3/4 of Americans broadly support trans rights, including almost half of Republicans, by the way. That's what I was alluding to earlier when we
Yes.
talked about pressing that
Yeah.
button. If everyone can press the button today, 3/4 of Americans would say, yeah, we're fine.
Done.
Trans equality, fine, whatever. However, this issue of trans people in sports, it is the one discrete issue in the broad spectrum of trans issues that I would say the majority of Americans just are not on board with. And that's because they just don't have the information at hand. So let's put it this way. In 2011, the NCAA implemented their trans inclusive policy. Now, this has been undone in the last year, but for 10 years, the NCAA had a policy where trans student athletes were permitted to compete, provided that they met certain requirements. So for trans men, that is, student athletes who are assigned female at birth and identify as men, they could just join whatever team they wanted. Because the scientific perception of their hormones and their body structure, whatever, was not seen to be an unfair advantage. For trans women, the rule had been you do hormone therapy for a year, and you are able to compete on a women's sports team. For 10 years, there were hundreds of thousands of young women in this country who were awarded college athletic scholarships at NCAA Division I, Division II, and Division III. Hundreds of thousands. How many of those young women, in your guesstimate, were trans?
Oh, gosh, Charlotte. 6.
If you had to guess, percentage, do it percentage-wise.
Of the hundreds of thousands?
Hundreds of thousands of young women who are in scholarships.
I'd say 0.0002%, 1%.
Zero.
Zero.
Since 2011, there has not been one single trans woman who has been awarded a college athletic scholarship in the United States of America. Now, in other countries, that might be the issue. That might be the case. There is not a single documented instance of a young trans woman that is a trans woman who comes out and competes on a women's sports team who has been awarded a college athletic scholarship in 10 years. It's never happened.
But how many transgender women are competing over the last 11 years? Forget about a scholarship for a minute. Extremely few.
So David Crary and Lindsay Whitehurst are reporters at the Associated Press. And about 2 years ago, not 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, when all of these pieces of legislation were popping up all across the country, were starting to pop up, these two reporters reached out to, almost every sponsoring lawmaker of these pieces of legislation. They asked a simple question. We see that you're passionate about this bill. Can you point to an instance in your state where this has been a problem so that we can interview these people or whatever? These two reporters, David Query and Lindsay Whitehurst, they were not able to find a single lawmaker who was able to point to an issue or point to an instance in their state where this had been an issue. They asked folks in Texas, they asked folks in Kansas, they asked folks in Missouri, they asked folks all across the country. Now, there was one lawmaker in Montana, and I think there was one lawmaker in, where was it? I want to say Mississippi.
Yeah.
Who pointed to Connecticut. Now, in Connecticut, there has been this burgeoning problem over time, where 2 years ago, there were two young trans women in high school who were running track and field. And one of them won a state championship over three young cis women.
Yes.
And the families of those young cis women sued the state of Connecticut over this issue to disallow trans young women from competing in high school athletics. Now, here's the funny thing. The day after they announced this lawsuit or filed a lawsuit or whatever, the fastest of the young trans women lost to one of the cis women who are now suing the state. You get what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
They won the state championship the day after they decided to sue the state of Connecticut over trans equality.
So,
I mean,
Charlotte,
it's
I completely concur with your overall point. Forget about scholarships. Just how many transgender women in the last 11 years have competed with cis women in high school or college sports? It's maybe a handful. And what the right does expertly, because I used to do some of this, is they take the one example and they convince their audience that this is happening everywhere.
So what's the one example, Joe?
No,
what's the one that we all know about? What's the one that we all know about?
Well, the swimmer.
The swimmer, Leah Thomas.
Thank you.
Right?
And that's happening then, Charlotte, everywhere.
Yeah.
I hear. Yeah. They think.
That's right. They take Leah Thomas, this poor young woman who did everything right.
Yeah.
She came out of the closet. She went on hormone therapy. She was not allowed to compete while she was on hormone therapy. She got through the process. She followed all the NCAA's rules. She consulted with her coach. She consulted with her team. And then she started competing. And at the NCAA championships, she won. I forget her event. I forget the exact distance. But she won one event. She lost in the other 3 or 4 events that she competed. She didn't even place in the other 3 or 4. But she won in this one event. Now, Joe, there were 23 NCAA records broken at the NCAA Women Division I diving and swimming championships. 23 NCAA records broken. How many of those did she break?
None, right?
None.
Or one.
None. Leah Thomas, who
the one example
we're told is the the way they dehumanize her is disgusting. Who we're told is this trans cyborg who is destroying women's sports. This poor young woman who's being characterized this way. She's not even among the top swimmers in history for the event she competed in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not only did she not break any records, she's not even among the top swimmers for the event in which she competed.
So Charlotte, again, even though you're right, there is not a problem here. There are a few isolated, and maybe I'm being generous when I say a few. There are some isolated instances, but in your mind, when it comes to the overall fairness, when there actually is an example, an instant, the fairness issue is there's a point in a transition per the NCAA guidelines or whatever. There's a point in that transition where that person can and should compete. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't think that if a young trans woman. So let me rephrase this. I don't think that if a closeted trans woman wakes up tomorrow and comes out and says, "Hey, I'm a trans woman. That's fine, but I now want to compete in women's sports," that should not be allowed. Because that young trans woman, because she has not gone through the proper medical steps, does have an unfair advantage. Kind of like boxing classes, right?
Yes.
You're not gonna let someone who's 200 pounds compete with someone who's 175 pounds. That's not fair. It's not fair. You have to fit the exact characteristics for that sporting event. But if a young woman goes through that process and does all she's supposed to do with hormone therapy, with any other requirements, she should be allowed to compete, hands down.
In the sports fanatic you are certainly an advocate. I don't want to speak for you. Like I hear some people say, get rid of male and female sports post puberty. Men should be able to compete in the girls' volleyball team and all. I mean, we should hang on to male and female sports teams in high schools and colleges, shouldn't we?
I think in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to worry about it, right? But we don't live in a perfect world.
Yeah.
I think Title IX is one of the greatest policies to emerge in the past several decades. That has led to so many great opportunities for young women in this country, not just sports, but the ancillary benefits that come from sports. I worship Billie Jean King. I worship all of these great women in American sports history who made it possible for women not only to compete in sports at a professional level, but also gave them a route to do other things outside of sports. There are so many men who have gone into sports and then got into politics or business or what have you based on the notoriety or accomplishments they had in sports. Women should have the same opportunities. So no, I don't believe that we are in an environment where we can just wholesale get away with gender segregated sports. However, I don't think this needs to be a zero-sum game. We don't have to get rid of women's sports, and we also don't have to ban trans people from competing in a fair framework. We can do both these things. The problem is that you have people who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, who are saying that we can do neither of those things. And it's bullshit. If you talk to scientists, if you talk to medical professionals, if you talk to sports experts who engage on this issue in good faith, that means engaging with the data that we have, looking at all the issues. And by the way, the NCAA did this. The NCAA did this in 2011. They talked with medical professionals. They talked with sports scientists. They talked with every expert in this field. They said, okay, we talked to everybody. We know what's going on here. We're going to put these rational policies in place. And by the way, there was not really much of a stink made when this happened. When the NCAA put out their policy in 2011, saying this could happen, the world did not fall down. It did not.
So Charlotte,
suddenly when it is electorally beneficial for Republicans, that's when it became a problem.
Maybe I misheard this. So when were those guidelines taken away?
Those guidelines were taken away because of political pressure by the Republican Party. When Leah Thomas started winning, when Leah Thomas started winning races, and when the Republican Party, and I would say social conservatives who might not identify as Republican, but they're certainly aligned with the Republican Party, when they started attacking the NCAA over this, sending death threats, things like that, the NCAA got scared and then backed out of the bill.
Are there any guidelines now? What?
So now, instead of having a NCAA-wide policy, the NCAA leaves it to individual sports to decide whether or not trans athletes can compete, which sucks, Joe. Because now,
that's ridiculous.
If you're this kid who has done everything right and followed the rules, dotted your I's and crossed your T's, all that stuff, you're now told that the NCAA does not have your back. And then you have to rely on these individual sports where, by the way, many of them are dominated by not experts, but whoever has the most political and financial power are now excluded from sports.
Hey, one more tiny one. Then I want to just get your thoughts on two political questions.
Okay.
When I was in Congress, the big issue on this issue, because we had a high school in my district, a transgender woman sharing bathroom and shower space with cisgender women. And many of the parents of the 16, 17, and 18-year-old young ladies, the cisgender women, complained it raised a big stink. I think that's another interesting small issue in this broader issue where Americans may just have some issues with. How do you handle that? Knowing that in Charlotte, I know just like the transgender people and sports issues, it's not happening everywhere, like Fox News would tell you. Continue.
No, but at the same time, in a way, it is happening everywhere. All across the country, there are young trans women who do use the same locker rooms and showers and have you as cisgender women.
Good point.
And there hasn't been a problem. Oh, let me tell you something. The bathroom issue. The bathroom issue is so hilarious to me. I mean, look. I think here's what I think about the bathroom issue. I think that cisgender men, that is, men who were assigned male at birth, identify as men, I think they're the ones who have an issue with this. Cis women, the vast majority of cis women don't give a shit. They don't care. You know why? You walk into a locker room, and I use the women's locker room in my gym.
Yeah.
No one cares. You have segregated stalls where you do your shower. I think cisgender men, because they've been conditioned by movies, they think that women just walk into the locker room naked, completely naked.
They want to think that, Charlotte.
Yes, they do. you're right. They do want to think that because it is titillating to think that way.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the issues that arise in women's restrooms is because someone is being an asshole and not handing over some spare toilet paper.
But you would acknowledge, my friend, that you are not 16 years old anymore. And there could be 16-year-old cisgender women in a high school who do have concerns. So how would you handle those concerns?
I think I would handle it the same way that there were concerns over openly lesbian 16-year-olds who used the locker room in the late 90s or early 2000s, or even as recently as 10 years ago. It used to be that, lesbians were discouraged from using women's locker rooms because it was seen that they were predators or that they were socially ostracized from doing so. Sit them down and explain the issue. It is more likely, magnitudes more likely, exponentially more likely that a young woman is going to be sexually assaulted or raped by a cisgender male that they know, whether it's a teacher, a colleague, what have you. Here's what I find rather fucking hilarious. If you look at sports across the country, there are constantly issues that pop up where a male coach has molested or assaulted or even raped a female student athlete, whether it's in high school or in college.
Yeah.
And when this happens, instead of the Republican Party being like, oh, this is bullshit. We got to protect women from this. Let's make sure that we put in some common sense policies that, would discourage would-be sexual assaulters or harassers, what have you. Instead of doing that, which would be common sense, they instead will say, well, look, we don't want to ruin this young man's life. We don't want to make this hard for this man. He made a mistake. He accidentally squeezed the ass of this female student athlete. He accidentally, raped her in the locker room, which, by the way, does happen. They tend to find ways of excusing this kind of behavior when it's a young man, and especially when it's a young white man. And especially when it's a young white man who has a quote unquote bright future. We find excuses to allow men to do horrible things to women in this country. And we pretend somehow, without a shred of credible evidence, that trans women are the actual predators who are going into women's spaces. It's bullshit. It is a bullshit framework, Joe. It is completely devoid of good faith. And I just think it's incredibly pathetic.
I agree. I think that the distinguishing feature here, per your analogy with lesbian young women, is the different genitalia. And so I think that is an issue. But to buttress your point, Charlotte, I remember back then, and this is an issue I've dealt with in my district with a number of parents, the objections were much stronger coming from the parents of the 16 and 17-year-old cisgender women than the young ladies themselves.
Yeah.
And that goes to what you said about 20 minutes ago about this being such a generational thing.
Yeah, you ask a 16-year-old cisgender woman what she's scared of when she's in a public space. It's not trans girls she's scared of. It's usually adult authority figures who are men who she's scared of. Or, even if they've done nothing wrong, she'll tell you, I'm on guard. I know that there's a chance that this man who I look up to as an authority figure could be threatening. That's what they're scared of. They're not scared of trans girls. Now, I will acknowledge that there are a very, very, very small fraction of 16-year-old cis girls who are uncomfortable with trans girls in the locker room.
Yeah.
That is absolutely a thing. And when that happens, there needs to be an open conversation within a community about how to reconcile those feelings of discomfort. Now, if people approach that issue in good faith, and parents talk to each other, and they talk to coaches, and they have a conversation going, that's how that should be fixed. But it should not be about giving this self-important, pandering political speech in which you demonize young trans women and pretend that they're an issue when they're not.
Well, Charlotte, it won't surprise you, but I just found in my dealings that the parents just fundamentally had a block, and they couldn't consider the transgender young women because they were just so solely focused on the genitalia.
Yeah.
And that just kept, again, the parents, that just kept hitting me over and over and over. Hey, as we wrap, what to do about this? Like, I think we're back to the broad. Transgender people in America still complete discrimination out there, and on the right, it is a target group to hate. I think there are a lot of older white people on the right that are just unreachable. I think most Americans embrace, even if they don't understand. And I think there are people on the left maybe that push too hard. Instead of helping and guiding, like I think you're very good at, helping and guiding most Americans get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, that has to make sense. And no, that is a critique I have of the left.
Oh, good.
I think that what the right is very good at doing, and I used to belong to a few evangelical churches back in the day. I was as progressive as I am now, but I used to go to a few evangelical churches, which, as we both know, are predominantly conservative. And what I find is that the conservative movement does a great job of giving people who are searching for something a sense of family.
Yeah.
A sense of, you can come here, your sins are absolved, be part of our team. The left is not good at that. The left, in fact, often is the opposite of that, saying that unless you hit every key point, unless you agree with us on all these things, and this is not the entire left. I'm sorry, right. I should say this. This is not the entire left.
Right.
I will say that this is a part of the progressive movement who does this, who have a very purist outlook on issues. And what happens is that people who would otherwise be open to having their minds changed are intimidated. They're scared to death. They're like, I think that if I hang out with someone who is leftist, and I say the wrong thing, they're going to hate me. The right doesn't do that. The right does that. Well, let me back up. The right does that with a few things, but I do think that the right gives more space, I would say, to being part of the club than the left does.
Charlotte, I agree with that, and I talk every day with people who are kind of in this reasonably tolerant middle, and a lot of what I hear is, I want to understand the transgender issue, Joe. I want to understand critical race theory, Joe. But man, I got these, you turn on whatever and AOC, and people are just shoving this woke shit down my throat. Let me get there, but they just keep shoving it down my throat. I hear variations of that, and I think it goes to, don't force me to be woke. Teach me and guide me to be woke.
Yeah.
Push back.
No, I want to push back. I do agree that some folks are like that. I also think that there are a lot of conservatives in this country, and certainly a lot of moderates, who use and I hate the word woke. God, I hate that word so much.
I don't.
I can't stand it. I can't.
Really?
So let's unpack this for a second. And this will be a great discussion point. How would you define the word woke?
Okay. And as a proudly newly woke person, I define it as, I am simply aware of basic injustices and inequities, systemic injustices that I was not aware of 4 or 5 years ago. That's my definition.
Okay, that's a good definition. That's a definition I can get on board with. How do you think they define woke?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Anti-woke people, how do they define woke?
I don't know. Why? Maybe I.
Oh, sure you do. You know the conservative movement. If you were to sit down with your friend and you were to ask them an honest question, like, "Hey, how would you define the word woke?" What would your conservative friend say to you?
There are 64 different genders, and anybody can marry anybody, and white people are bad, and there's white privilege, and they would just go through the litany, and they're shoving all this shit down my throat.
I think that woke has become a very convenient catch-all term for anything that makes us uncomfortable. I think that is the true definition of the word woke. And by the way, the word woke started out as a term in the Black community.
Yeah.
And it was seen as, it comes from the phrase "stay woke." It was seen as a phrase of, hey, keep your head on a swivel. Don't make sure you're not being taken in. Over time, this got appropriated by the rest of us, that is, those of us who are white, to mean basically anything that makes us uncomfortable. And that's why I don't use the word woke. I just think it's such a bullshit concept. I can't stand it. People misuse it. It's become basically anything that I don't like is woke. That is
well, Charlotte, that's true. It's been co-opted. And I hear your point on uncomfortable, but maybe it's because I come from the polar opposite of where you come from. I think it's a good time for people like me and white conservative people lovingly to feel a little uncomfortable. So I don't have
too.
Yeah.
And not just white conservative people, probably, really all of us with whatever privileges we have. We should all feel uncomfortable. By the way, discomfort is a gift.
Oh,
discomfort is great.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
Discomfort means that there is something that is misaligned and that you have to figure it out. There's an opportunity there to learn a lot. Right?
Yes. Perfectly put, Charlotte Clymer. Perfectly put. 3 more quickies. Overall, then, how do we as a country continue to make progress on this issue?
Quite literally having conversations like this.
Okay.
Quite literally.
Okay.
I've talked to Trump supporters in, I would say, random settings. I was at the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service, and I worked with a couple of Republicans while I was there as a fellow. Alyssa Farah Griffin, for example, and, Ambassador Lighthouser, who was in Trump's cabinet.
Yeah,
I got along with them great. We had some great conversations. Now we we traditionally don't agree on almost anything, but the conversations I had with them were done in good faith, and they realized that oh my goodness, there are things that I don't know about this. I'll give you another example. Let's not do professional Trump people. Let's do like ordinary rank and file Trump supporters.
Yeah.
And by the way, Alyssa Farah Griffin, to the best of my knowledge, does not support Trump anymore. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, she does not.
However, I met this couple in late 2020 when I was on a mini vacation. I did a road trip during COVID, put on a mask and stayed at some hotel outside of DC. And I met this young married couple who were there in the lobby, and we got to talking. They kind of sheepishly told me that they voted for Trump because they were worried about all this stuff, blah blah blah. Yeah. And we talked for like an hour. Great conversation, and they said, you know what, we're really sorry. The guy, in fact, he said, you know what, I would not have expected having this conversation with a trans person. Would never have expected this. Yeah, because they thought that they just expected something completely different. Yes, because they've been told again and again and again that trans people are coming after their children. They're going to suck the blood out of their babies. Exactly. Cat litter boxes in classrooms. All this crazy batshit stuff. They would never have guessed that if they just sat down and had this kind of conversation with a trans person, that they would walk away feeling better. And by the way, the conversation made me feel better too, because it made me realize that a lot of these folks are engaging in good faith. They just don't know any better because their brains are being filled with this vile propaganda day in and day out.
Bingo. Most people may not know that you were in the military.
Yeah.
That you were in the Army. You said, I think you've said this a few times, being in the military, and tell me if I'm quoting you wrong, gave me the strength to face my fear. Yeah. What did you mean by that?
Oh, wow.
I love that line.
Knew. Oh, yeah. And I think regardless of who you are, across different backgrounds, military service is one of those things that really pushes you to your limits and makes you realize that you could do things that otherwise you would have thought you couldn't do. When I signed up, when I enlisted in the military, I made the I made the curious decision to make it as hard as possible. So the recruiter, I got great ASVAB scores, and the recruiter's like, you can do anything you want. You could be a translator. You could be what do you want to do, kid? What do you want to do? I was like, I want to do infantry. That's what I want to do.
Oh, geez, Charlotte, what were you thinking?
Oh, yeah. I know. And the recruiter's like, there was a pause. There's this awkward pause, and the recruiter's like, okay, let me repeat this. You can do anything you want. You can be a foreign translator, right? So the recruiter was deeply skeptical because they saw, this obviously progressive kid who was joining the military, and I think my recruiter assumed I was gay, by the way, which isn't surprising. And he just thought this isn't the way you should go, but if you really want this, go for it. And I did. So I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. It's basic training on Sand Hill, and it sucked. It sucked. 15 weeks and 3 days. And it felt like I was there for 2 or 3 years. I mean, it felt that long. It was, my mental psyche got the shit beat out of it while I was there. And the thing is, though, is that when I had accomplished it, when I had graduated from basic training, when I went to my unit and integrated and, into my, infantry unit and was, challenged on a weekly basis with getting better at things, learning how to disassemble an M240, learning how to, lead a squad into a battle, learning how to deploy a Clymer mine, all these things that you have to learn how to do that you think are really hard when you're outside of it. But when you're inside of it, learning how to do it, you're challenged every day. And so I'm rambling at this point, but
interesting.
All these things that I did in the military kind of gave me a sense of confidence. And when I came out as trans, I think that being in the military made it easier to come out as trans because it made me think, you know what? I did that. I can do this too.
Anything.
Right.
Hey, Charlotte, how old were you when you knew you were a woman?
Oh, God. So I want to be clear about this. Not every trans person's experiences are the same. And the reason being is that, people grow up in different cultural environments.
Yeah.
They may have a different framework for understanding gender. It's complicated. For me, I knew as early as I had consciousness. Now, I didn't know the terminology, though. I didn't know I was transgender. Yeah. I wouldn't have even said that, when I was like 3 or 4, I knew I wanted to wear girls' dresses.
Yeah.
But I didn't know why I wanted to wear girls' dresses. But it wasn't just wearing women's clothing. I didn't want a penis. I wanted a vagina. I wanted breasts. I wanted a woman's body. And this was very early on. And there are two approaches for closeted trans kids usually, especially for those who are my age. The vast majority of us were closeted. We would act out. We'd rebel. We'd find ways to knock over some mailboxes or whatever. For me, though, I went the other way. I would go to church. I would pray every week to God to be cleansed of this need to be transgender. I wanted to do everything right in my life because I felt if I do everything right, if I please God, then God will make it so that I'm finally comfortable being a boy. And it never happened. After all that time of going to church, after playing high school football, after being a really good kid, making good grades, going to the military, after all that bullshit, Joe, it didn't work. I did self-conversion therapy. That's basically what I did.
Jeez.
I basically did a self-conversion therapy. And let me tell you, it was more destructive of me to deny that and to go through all of this pain than it was to finally talk to someone and get to the root medical causes of this. And by the way, and I want to be very clear about this to your listeners, being trans is not a choice. It is not a choice. And I'm going to say something controversial here. I think the vast majority of trans people, if they could have the choice of whether or not to be trans, they would choose not to be trans.
Wow.
Because it fucking sucks. It really does.
Yeah.
We are constantly made to feel small. We are constantly made to feel that we are, unsettling the comfort of those around us, that we do not belong in certain spaces, or maybe any space for that matter.
Yeah.
So being trans is not a choice. The only choice that we make is whether or not to come out as trans.
Yeah. God, Charlotte, that's I'd never thought of it that way. And I'd never thought of it the way you just said it, that, and it not speaking negatively of being trans, but if most transgender people had a choice, they wouldn't have chosen this because it sucks.
And it's not because they're ashamed to be trans. I want to be
Exactly.
clear about this. It's not about
Exactly.
being ashamed to be trans. It's about the complications that come with being
The
trans.
shit you deal with. The shit you
That's
deal
right.
with.
And by the way, that is gender dysphoria.
Right.
That is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is not an internal,
Right.
it's not about something wrong with you inside. It's about the way the world responds to you and the incongruency between who you are as a person and how society wants you to be.
Charlotte, two quickies. And again, awkward segue. These midterms politically, where's your head at?
6 months ago, I would have said, and by the way, is my audio coming through okay?
Perfect. Still got the audio. Yeah.
Just making sure, because the video stopped, unfortunately, but I just want to make sure.
All good.
Okay. 6 months ago, I would have told you that I was terrified of what would happen in midterms. Because 6 months ago, things looked really, really bad.
Yep.
But a number of things happened that suddenly made the equation a lot murkier. So the Dobbs ruling came down to the Supreme Court, overturning Roe v. Wade, allowing the states to decide whether or not abortion should be legal. And then Kansas had a ballot initiative go up.
Yeah.
Now, I think, like most people, I thought that Kansas would overwhelmingly pass an abortion ban. That's what I expected. I think a lot of us expected that. Maybe not the organizers in Kansas. Maybe they were a lot more optimistic than we were, but I did not expect good news.
Yeah.
And instead,
they did.
By almost a 2-to-1 margin, Kansas voters across the board said resolutely that abortion should be legal in their state.
Republicans said that.
Republicans said that abortion should be legal in their state. Suddenly, you're seeing that happen. You're seeing young women in red states that are registering to vote in record numbers. And then you had all these legislative victories that have been had by the Biden administration, by the Democratic Congress, with a few Republicans voting in favor. All these things have happened. So, look, I've seen the polls. I get it. Things look really murky right now for Democrats. But things also looked murky in 2017 in the Virginia elections when, it wasn't terribly clear that Democrats were going to do well in Virginia. They did. In 2018, do you remember what the news was the month prior to the 2018 election? It was about the caravans.
Oh God, that's right.
Remember the
That's
caravans?
right.
Remember all
that's
that
right.
bullshit? The caravans were coming up from South America up through Mexico.
Yeah, that's right.
Come and invade the country, right? All this bullshit news, and we expected that the Democrats wouldn't do so well in 2018, and then they did. Democrats took back Congress. So I see all this news. I get it. I'm still optimistic. I think, here's my prediction. I think the Democrats are going to win 2 seats in the Senate, and that we are going to have either one or 2 seat net gain in the House. That is my prediction.
Oh my God, Charlotte, you're smoking something.
I'm an outlier. I am an outlier. I think most Democrats are not optimistic right now.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Last question, Charlotte Clymer. What's one thing you wish people understood about you? And you can pause and think about that as much as you want.
I appreciate that. There's a part of me who is this Christian military veteran from Texas. I'm proud to be a Christian. I'm proud to be a veteran. I'm proud to be from Texas. I'm proud that I grew up on country music. All these things. And there's another part of me that is this, trans woman with progressive values who lives in DC.
Yeah.
These are the same people. This is the same person. And it really pisses me off when people try to put me in one of 2 boxes. And by the way, both the right and the left do this.
Yeah.
So when it's the right, they'll say, you're not really a Christian because you're transgender. You're not really a military veteran because you're progressive. You're not really a Texan because, you don't agree with me on this or that issue. And on the left, and then I will say the far left, usually leftists, and I don't say that term pejoratively. They're just people who are leftists and they identify as leftists. There are leftists who don't believe that I am a good trans person because I'm a Christian, because I'm a veteran, because I'm not ashamed of my military service. And, both these sides can go to hell for all I care. We need more nuance in this country. We need to understand that people are complicated, that we all have different facets.
Yeah.
And I refuse to judge somebody. Absolutely refuse to judge somebody solely because they may not see the world the same as I do. That's terrible.
Beautifully put, Charlotte, and poignantly, I think, points to where we are at today.
Yes,
Charlotte Clymer, everybody, follow her on Twitter. Follow her with everything she does. I think she's wonderful. And Charlotte, I want you to run for president one day. You're young enough; you can still do it.
I'm not running for president, but Sarah McBride in Delaware. I think someday she's going to be president.
Okay,
Sarah McBride.
Sarah McBride. But if she is, I want you involved in that. Charlotte, thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Joe. And Joe, by the way, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. I know that we used to argue a lot on Twitter.
I deserved all this shit you gave me.
Well,
most of it.
I can get frustrated and be a little angry sometimes with people. But, I really love that we were able to meet here and actually chat in good faith with each other. I really do feel that we're starting a nice friendship here.
Hey, this is what this fucking country needs.
That's right.
Charlotte Clymer, you rock. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You too, Joe.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.